Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as British Poetry. Friends, we are discussing a very famous poem, Kubla Khan, and this is the last lecture of this poem. This poem is written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The last class we talked about this poem considering as a dream vision in Romanticism. In today's lecture, we will be talking about let us say a contextual interpretation of the poem in reference to the social theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So, you may feel that when we are talking about S.T. Coleridge, from where this person Jean-Jacques Rousseau came, he was a philosopher, social scientist, but there is relation of Jean-Jacques Rousseau with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and we are going to analyze and interpret all these things in this 30 minutes lecture. But before moving on, let us now try to understand that what we are going to learn, what will be the lecture outcome of this 30 minutes lecture. Friends, after analyzing this lecture, you would be able to interpret the social theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in reference to romantic poetry of S.T. Coleridge. So, why this lecture is important? This lecture is important because here you are going to amalgamate social theory with the romantic poetry. Both are related to each other, but how? We are going to learn about that in this poem, in this let us say lecture, which is the last lecture of unit 10. You are going to we are going to end this poem and this unit in this lecture. In the next lecture, we will come with a new unit, unit 11, and a new text. So, without wasting much time, let us now start talking about the social theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, born in Geneva in 1712, was one of the 18th century most important political thinkers, and which is why we are reading it, because this poem and the Romantic age is from 1798 to 1830, and this person Jean-Jacques Rousseau was the predecessor philosopher of the age. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was let us say in the he wrote in the age of let us say Samuel Johnson, or the later part of the neoclassical age, because we say that neoclassical age continued up to let us say 1780 or 90. Some people say that neoclassical age or the age of Pope ended in 1750, and then from 1750 to 1780 or 85 the age of Johnson continued, but the major ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau came in front of the world in the age of Samuel Johnson, and thus he was the philosopher who influenced the Romantic age, Romantic writers, and this person S.T. Coleridge was one of those people. His works focused on the relationship between human society and the individual, and contributed to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution. Friends, when we look at let us say the relationship between human society and individuality in the works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we find that he is the major contributor to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution. You can imagine that how a philosopher impacted the French Revolution, how much important Jean-Jacques Rousseau was, because he believed in the let us say natural freedom of human beings, and which is why the French Revolution occurred. The people were influenced from his ideas, the individuality, the freedom, the let us say the purity of mind, and the French Revolution, as you know, on the in the counterpart was the root cause of the Romantic age. Thus, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ideas are also related to Romanticism. His later work argued that the development of civilization has actually led to a decrease in happiness, and that humans should live instead in a state that was as close to nature as possible. Friends, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a believer of nature. He expected that the development of let's say civilization is actually leading the decrease in happiness. And why the happiness is decreasing? Because human beings are moving away from nature. The true happiness, the peace, satisfaction of mind is instead in a state where we are closer to the nature rather than living an artificial life and moving far away from nature. And this is one of the root causes of romantic, let's say, age, romantic revolution, romantic movement, because artists and poets felt that the common people are moving away from nature. They are living the life of artificiality, and we had seen it in the poetry of Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift and Dryden and many other, let's say, writers of the neoclassical age. We had seen that separation from the nature by the, let's say, with the common people, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau was offended from this, let's say, unnatural life, and thus he wrote his ideas on social theory. The social contract, friends, the social contract is the name of the most famous book written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So, the social contract, with its famous opening sentence, "Man is born free and he is everywhere in chains." This is, friends, all of us had heard about this statement, that man is born free. When a child is born free, but everywhere in chains. What are those chains? Those chains are the chains of experiences and the society. Now, this sentence stated instead that people could only experience true freedom if they live in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-beings of the citizens. Friends, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was the staunch believer of human rights and freedom. He believed that people can experience the true freedom only if they live in a civil society. What does this civil society concept means? Civil society means that whosoever is ruling you, they are appointed by you and they are governed by you. The, let's say, rights of the people are protected only under the rulers which are appointed by the people themselves and not any monarch. So, for the well-beings of the citizens, for the development of a, let's say, city, a country, this kind of democratic process is most essential aspect. Being part of such a society involved submitting to the general will, a force that transcended individuals and aimed to uphold the common good. Friends, this concept of common good is the major contribution of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It is a term which is associated with his ideas. Common good means in which everyone's, let's say, rights are protected. In such a society which is constructed on the basis of the general will, people wish to create that society, a force that is transcended the individuals, let's say, influence the individuals, and then this force is aimed to uphold the common good. This kind of, let's say, idea, friends, you may feel is utopian, but Rousseau has imagined it and he had lived it throughout his life. Rousseau's theories of sovereignty and law had a direct influence on French revolutionaries such as Robespierre, and were blamed for some of the worst excess of the terror in France. Friends, as we have discussed that the root cause of French Revolution was the depression and the dissatisfaction among the French people. Now, Rousseau's ideas fired that depression. When Rousseau gave the theories of sovereignty and law, there was a direct influence of French revolutionaries, just like Robespierre, of the ideas of Rousseau, and they were blamed for some of the worst excesses of terror in France. Although there was terror, but that terror was created to create a, let us say, democratic government, to create a peace in the society. Nevertheless, the social contract has also been seen as one of the defining texts of modern political philosophy. Friends, this is very important, that when we talk about the political science or philosophy in the modern context, we look at the social context in the root of that idea of modern political philosophy. Why? Because it emphasizes the need of individuals to play a responsible part in civil society if they want their liberty to be assured. So, for the liberty, for the holistic development of citizens, such kind of, let us say, civil society, such kind of, let us say, appointed rulers need to are must, they are most essential parts in a liberal society. Rousseau's central argument in the social contract is that government attains its rights to exist and to govern the consent of the governed. Now, what are, let us say, Rousseau's ideas? What is his central argument? Basically, he wished to say that when government attains its rights to exist and to govern by the consent of the governed, it means that the citizens are indirectly ruling themselves, the citizens are indirectly governing themselves. Such kind of, let us say, idea can only protect the rights of the common masses. Today, this may not seem too extreme an idea, but it was a radical position when the social contract was published. Friends, when we, let us say, look at the too extreme, this idea as it may not seem as too extreme, but when this idea came in the 18th century, it was in a radical position. Why? Because monarchy was very powerful. If somewhere monarchy is not powerful, church is very powerful. Roman Catholicism and, let us say, the church, the Vatican City is governing almost in the entire Europe. And in that kind of society, when a person, a philosopher, gives the idea of the civil society and the appointed rulers, this is something which is very radical, unacceptable, and thus Rousseau has got many threats, life threats in his lifetime. Rousseau discusses numerous forms of government that may not look very democratic to modern eyes, but his eyes were always on figuring out how to ensure that the general will of all the people could be expressed as truly as possible in their government. Friends, we may find that in the present century, Rousseau's ideas are not much relevant or not much, let us say, radical. But when the ideas were, let us say, presented, most of the places were influenced, let us say, surpassed by monarchy, and which is why the democratic spirit from the modern eyes can be seen by Rousseau himself. His focus was always on figuring out, let us say, some methods, trying to take a middle way to ensure the general will of all the people. What all people think, what they expect from their life, how can they be happy, how can they express true and possible governance in their, let us say, society. He always aimed to figure out how to make society as democratic as possible. So, Rousseau's ideas are, let us say, behind the modern democracy. At one point in the social contract, Rousseau admiringly cites the example of the Roman Republic's comitia to prove that even large states composed of many people can hold assemblies of all their citizens. So, friends, Rousseau was not, let us say, a person talking about hypothetical conditions, but he had given concrete, let us say, examples in his philosophy. He took the example of the ancient Rome. The Roman Republic comitia was, let us say, a combination of many tribes. There were people, they had their direct representatives, and then there is a committee which takes the decision and which, let us say, influences all the parts of Rome, and Rome was the largest state at that time. So, he was trying to prove that such kind of assemblies can be formed for the benefit of the common citizens. Amidst the turbulence of the revolutionary ideas in 1798, Samuel Taylor Coleridge embraced his utopian principles in his poem Kubla Khan in reaction to the social violence and political needs of the time. Friends, now let us come to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem Kubla Khan and how it is influenced from the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We know that after French Revolution there was a complete turmoil and disturbance and let us say civil war and disturbance in entire Europe. And in this let us say revolutionary scenario of 1798, this turbulence, this let us say state of disturbance, Samuel Taylor Coleridge has embraced this kind of utopian principle in Kubla Khan. Why utopian? Because he is talking about a dream world, a paradise which nowhere exists, but he wished to create in the pleasure dome, in the form of the pleasure dome. Such kind of let us say social violence, such kind of political needs of the time which do not exist. The social violence was everywhere. Coleridge knew about that. He wanted to create a paradise, a peaceful environment. The political needs of the time expected such kind of poem in literature, and thus we can say that Kubla Khan is not only an imaginary poem, but it is a political poem as well. It was the need of the hour. The paradise of an ideal state originating with the pre-Christian utopia in Plato's Republic. So, we can say that before Christianity, we can say that the time of pagan religions, when utopians in the Plato's Republic used to pray the sea god or the let us say sun or the nature, such kind of paradise, such kind of ideal state was somewhere visible in this poem Kubla Khan. So, all these ideas anticipate the dialectic encounter in the Romantic era. There was an encounter in the Romantic era between the Christianity and the pagan religion, and we had seen it in the poems of William Wordsworth as well. The poets and philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau in The Contract Social and Johanna Wolfgang von Goethe in The Wonder Jar, these are the let us say books written by these philosophers which talked about the encounter between the poets and the philosophers about the Romantic age. What kind of society they should live in, whether that society should be governed by the monarchs or that society should be governed by the people themselves, by their representatives, an ideal state. We can say that the utopian world which is portrayed in the poem Kubla Khan is somewhere related to the ancient Greek and Roman time, and thus Coleridge is a strong believer of that utopia which this writer Jean-Jacques Rousseau has imagined into his book Social Contract. Along with Rousseau, Coleridge upheld the importance of individual freedom, yet distinguished his desire for the sovereign will to govern. Friends, when we let us say look at this poem with a political perspective, we feel that Coleridge is trying to let us say give individual freedom so much importance in this poem. Although it is let us say distinguished, his desires are distinguished with a sovereign will to govern based on reason. Coleridge is not let us say only passionate in this poem, only emotional, but he is reasonable as well. From Rousseau's conclusion, he got this reason, and what was that conclusion? That all men should share in the power to govern equally, or the consent of the will. So, just like in a democratic government, the people are sharing the power, not an individual. in the same way that equal governance, that consent towards the will, is visible in the poem Kubla Khan, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau has imagined in the book The Social Contract. Struggling with these democratic ideas, Coleridge proved the fundamental belief of the Jacobins, equality. When we look at this poem, we feel that the democratic ideas being struggled upon by Coleridge into this poem, and the conclusion which comes out from this poem is that he has those kind of fundamental beliefs which Jacobians had about, let us say, equality. S.T. Coleridge believed in equality, although he believed in individuality, but then he feels that all individuals are equal and they must have the right to share their thoughts at all kind of platforms. Considering Coleridge's changing political and religious beliefs during the revolutionary period, the representation of paradise within the utopian myth of this era can be examined more precisely through an analysis of his poetic language and socio-political theory. Friends, we can look at this poem with a socio-political theoretical perspective. We can see that Coleridge is changing the political and religious beliefs of the revolutionary period. At that time of Romantic age, the representation of paradise within the utopian myth of this era, which we had seen in that age, can be, let us say, visualized in this poem Kubla Khan. Maybe that poet is trying to examine precisely through the analysis of the poetic language and socio-political theory. Maybe we can believe that Coleridge is trying to give a new shape to this socio-political theory by the literary perspective. He is trying to relate the socio-political theory with literature in this poem by creating a utopian society. Two powerful influences on Coleridge's thought, the ancient Greek and the German, support the argument I am attempting to prove that Coleridge's utopian principles are a deliberate component of his poetics in Kubla Khan, written in 1797. Friends, I believe that Coleridge's thoughts had a strong influence of the ancient Greek and German philosophy. He believed, he is trying to prove the utopian principles, and this is a deliberate, let us say, component of the poetry Kubla Khan. He is trying to create that impact through this poem. The paradise in Kubla Khan, not merely derived from or linked to the ideas of others, substantiate Coleridge's dreaming place where he envisioned his utopian society. Friends, when we talk about this, the paradise which is mentioned in the Kubla Khan, we see that it is not merely deriving from or linked to the ideas of others, but it substantiates Coleridge's dreaming place, whereas he envisioned his utopian society. Friends, this is not only about others, but this is about Coleridge's ideas on utopia as well. His vision represented an idealized form of government, wherein society could learn to achieve some semblance of equality. But Coleridge also recognizes that equality in the diverse environment could not become the symbol of uniformity. Friends, when we go deep into this poem, we feel that Coleridge believes in equality, but he do not believe in uniformity. There is a variety in nature. There are some flowers which are red, then blue, then some flowers which are big, then some flowers which are small, and thus the nature is not uniform. The uniformity is the characteristic of artificiality. When we talk about the diversity, it is not the natural instinct. Diversity is natural, uniformity is artificial. So, Coleridge believed in equality, but he did not believe in uniformity, and that is visible in the varied images portrayed in the poem Kubla Khan. As we examine these concerns of individual freedom today, to discover the relevance of our democratic ideas, we may very likely turn to Coleridge with his insightful intellectual remarks and question the firmness with which individuality and constitutionalism remain girded by democracy. Friends, when we, let's say, examine this poem or the concerns of individual freedom by S.T. Coleridge in this poem Kubla Khan, and when we look at all these things from present society perspective, we discover the relevance of the democratic ideas. The democratic ideas are established through this poem Kubla Khan. We may likely to turn Coleridge with his insightful intellectual remarks. Coleridge was an insightful person. There is a philosopher in a poet, in the form of a poet, when we look at Coleridge. The intellectual remarks which Coleridge has, those are, let's say, those make him completely different from the other poets of the Romantic age. The question, the firmness with which individuality and constitutionalism gilded by democracy are portrayed in Kubla Khan were never portrayed in the history of literature. So friends, with this note we can understand that this poem is not only about individuality or, let's say, constitutionalism, but this poem is about democratic spirit. It is about individuality, it is about freedom, it is about, let's say, individual's existence. We can say that Kubla Khan is not an individual, but Kubla Khan is the representative of the common people. Kubla Khan wished to create his own palace. In the same way, a common man also tried to create his own, let's say, palace, his own house, his own lifestyle, which is idealistic. And thus, this poem is not completely artificial, completely ideal, but this is the, let's say, representation of the hidden realistic ideas of a common person. I believe that you will now look at this poem with a political perspective also, with a social perspective also, with a philosophical perspective also, rather than merely considering this poem as a literary artistic piece. I hope that in this lecture you have completely understood the holistic meaning and the different, let's say, interpretations of this poem Kubla Khan. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.